Hey everyone, welcome back to Vstudio. I'm joined here today with Lauren Zach. Lauren is the Director of Business Development at Storage Solutions and somebody whom I would consider a sales guru. So we're going to have a conversation about the dirty S word today, sales, what it means, how you should think about it, and really excited to get all of Lauren's perspective. So Lauren, thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for inviting me, and really excited to talk about sales. I wouldn't say guru, but I certainly have had my fair share of opportunities to kind of pull back the curtain and see lots of different organizations, sales structures and sales cultures. And so I'm excited to chat with you today.
Well, Lauren, we came across each other in a very organic way, similar industries, businesses at one point in time that could help one another. And I got to know you and was really just impressed with the way you thought about things. And in my mind, sales has such a bad reputation of, implying that I'm getting you to buy something you don't need. And I think you approach it from a really fresh perspective, both from a sales strategy and tactics standpoint, but also sales operations and being methodical. So first things first, just kind of give me a little bit about your background, how you think about sales philosophically, how you found yourself in this world, because I do think you have a great mind in sales. We'll get more into the specifics, but I'd love to just hear kind of why you're in it and what you think about it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my background's a little different, I think, than most folks in the sales space. So my last role that I held for about 8 years is actually with a sales consulting firm. And I started myself in a business development position where I was basically cold calling and trying to develop new business with right fit customers. And that experience in itself, I think, is something that most salespeople need to experience to really grow in their career, but especially into sales leadership. Those best practices that you learn, the do's and don'ts, those will carry on with you through every step of the way. So that's really how I started out in sales. Of course, I had some retail jobs and some different things that I did in school that I was growing up. My entire family's in sales. I tried to run away from it over and over and over again. My uncle finally said, what are you doing? Just let it happen. And so I'm very happy to be within a sales position today. But in the sales consulting firm, I really had the opportunity to kind of pull back in a few different ways and get a bigger picture as to, what is an organization's strategy behind sales. A lot of people just add bodies, right? They're adding salespeople and expecting that their business is going to scale and grow by adding additional people. And we all know that, first of all, people are hard to get. The right people are even harder to get. But really, people alone, without mechanisms, without procedures, without insight and data, it's not really a strategy. And so I really found myself in a position where I could help companies understand, what levers they needed to pull ultimately to scale and find repeatable processes. And that's really important to me, is the repeatable side of things. There's always going to be like that sales leader that's, kind of got the anomaly situations going on where they've got a really great referral network, or they hit it big with one customer and that recurring business is growing and allowing for them to succeed. But I really want to focus on the people that don't have that are kind of starting from scratch and having to build that way. And that's when we can start to predict what's going on. So that's a little bit about my background. I've worked with, I want to say probably 80 to 100 different organizations, specifically on the topic of new business development and sales. And the organization that I'm with today, very similarly, I'm helping to come in and, kind of rethink our processes, our toolkit, how we train our individuals, and again, what levers do we need to pull at what time, and really, kind of helping build a strong sales culture and sales structure.
Yeah, I love that, because I think you alluded to the fact that sales is a lot of different things. There are different roles within it, and it's all about setting up systems for success, not just getting an A player who's really good on the phone or really good in person.
Exactly.
With that, what are some of the metrics, and you can be specific or categorical here, that you think are important for organizations to pay attention to as relates to their sales efforts and the health of it overall?
Definitely. I think, a lot of companies fall into a common pitfall of looking at just revenue generation or GP. And at the end of the day, absolutely do need that to make financial decisions, to understand whether or not someone is, providing the results needed to support and grow the business. But I think what a lot of companies forget about is everything that goes into getting to the point of quote. So, how do we find new decision makers, build new intelligence for companies, identify next purchase timeframes, and start to build relationships with net new customers? Because, at the end of the day, while even some of your strongest relationships are growing, I know it's kind of a pessimistic view, but you also kind of have to keep in mind that maybe you're one day closer to not being partnered with them. And so what steps are you taking basically to build a pipeline? And so that's what I've really focused on helping organizations understand is, what are the behaviors and activities that are going to generate opportunities that will lead to pipeline contribution, that will lead to profit and revenue. And so, I think everybody also would say, yeah, activity, of course, there's skill behind it, but you have to make a certain number of, outreach points to get enough people, on the hook, to have enough good conversations to generate that opportunity. So it's a little bit of activity, but I also think it's really heavily reliant on intelligence. Like I said, decision makers, next purchase timeframes, learning how that company makes decisions, who they're working with today, so on and so forth. And all of those puzzle pieces are really individual metrics that will kind of help you identify new opportunity, but also identify issues with a salesperson much faster than are they producing profit or not. So that's how I typically look at the metric side of things. And in the last question that you asked, I didn't address, kind of what I think about sales and sales getting a bad rap. And I do want to say that I think a lot of people obviously, traditionally give sales a bad rap of that kind of used car salesman. And I think we're getting away from that. But I think what a lot of people are still kind of stuck on is thinking that sales is easy. Yeah. It's one of the most challenging professions out there emotionally, in terms of your intelligence, in terms of your commitment and consistency. And so I really want to look to help salespeople work on their areas of weakness and then, rely and expand upon their strengths versus saying, hey, you just need to reach out. It doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't happen with the flip of a switch.
And a lot of this, becomes best practices within organizations. Over time, you learn what makes your organization, your people effective, and that's being able to effectively track those metrics like you talked about. Who's responsible for the governance model there? Because it is, one of the common sales complaints I hear is, I spend more time logging what I did or what happened than I do actually out selling and helping customers. You, of course, know as a leader how important that intelligence is. So maybe talk a little bit about how companies should think about that balance of, gunslinging and going out and getting things done, and then the discipline to actually set up stages in the sales process and, drop downs, reason codes, things that ultimately paint this picture of how can we be excellent at what we do.
Yeah. In terms of ownership, the first thing I would say, and I'll explain further, is everyone has some level of ownership into sales metrics. But I do think that at the leadership level in an organization, especially executive leadership, is where we get to understand, are we really committed to our growth? And that commitment many times comes with financial commitment, commitment of investing in new technologies. But really, it's the commitment of accountability. And I'm going to put this new technology in place. I'm going to add this person. I'm going to do this sales training. But doing that one time or introducing a new tool, we all know this, unless you're using it regularly, it's not going to benefit you in any way. It's like signing up for a gym membership and 6 months down the line, not understanding why you've gained 5 pounds if you're not going. It's the same exact mentality there. So I think it really starts at the top in terms of, are we committing to help our people grow and succeed and therefore help the company grow and succeed. But when we look at individual metrics, I think what I like to do, and it's a really simplified way of doing it because it's so overwhelming, there's so many different metrics out there, is first kind of identifying what's important to you, what's important to your business, and every business is going to be a little bit different. But then basically just charting and writing out all of the different metrics and then starting to assign them to different groups, and then within those groups, different roles. But I would say that my biggest, piece of advice, I guess 2 pieces of advice. One would be, don't forget about the conversion points or the transition points between teams. If you have a marketing team that's generating leads for a business development team, what's happening in that transition? Are there leads that are falling through the cracks? Are our conversion rates not where we want them to be? What does that say about lead quality? Or what does that say about the person qualifying those leads and the process of which they do that? Same would go with leads being qualified and sent over to salespeople, or salespeople, planning and sending a project over for execution. All those points of transition are typically really forgotten inside of, the analysis of data. And so that's something I would encourage organizations to think about, is all those different points of conversion. What does it mean if we convert well, or what does it mean if we convert poorly in this particular area of business? Another thing I would think about as well is just putting ownership on the people that you're trying to help and that you're providing, this visibility to the metrics. So, building sales dashboards, that should not be something that salespeople are doing for themselves. That should be something the organization's doing for them. That being said, you have to then give that ownership over to a salesperson and say, this is your job to manage it. I've given you all the tools and visibility into these different metrics that we believe are key indicators of your success. Now you're the person that should be updating. You're the person that should be filling those, activity metrics up to where they need to get. And so, I think there's a lot of personal ownership that every person has to take, but we have to put that back on sales reps, because at the end of the day, they're the people that are going to define whether or not they're going to be successful, keeping in mind that we have to give them the tools and the training and all of the different things to kind of help them get there.
Of course. And obviously, the context matters there too. If I understand why I'm being asked to track certain things or do things a certain way, it helps, because I feel like it's now part of this bigger picture, part of my role. So maybe talk for a minute about sharing data with intention, because I've seen too much data and too many slicers allow people to create narratives, or AKA excuses, for why things are the way they are. And the people in the organization, they've always got a spin on something. And I think that's a new age issue, where we have so much information that we can build narratives on it that aren't necessarily consistent with what's happening. So how do you deal with that, especially in larger, more complex organizations where there's lots of moving parts and pieces, and it's not always transparent as to, who's doing the best work and who's got the highest performance, because there's just so much happening? How do you maintain clarity and governance over that data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when an organization is looking to grow or struggling, and they're not just celebrating win after win after win after win, you're right. Data can be used in a negative manner. It can be misconstrued. And that's, one of the challenging parts about data is that it's there, but the way that you tell that story, the time frames in which you look at, different points of data, the different points of data that you relate to one another, that can absolutely change the tune, both in a positive and a negative manner. I think, introducing data into an organization and starting to, kind of bring up data health and data capture as a priority is something that you kind of have to do slowly. You have to first start to educate your people on why this is important for the organization, but really for them. What is filling out this field in CRM going to do for you in the long run? Today, it might mean very little. Tomorrow it might mean very little. 6 months from now, what does that mean to the way that you're prioritizing the accounts in your pipeline or your leads, understanding the frequency in which you touch customers. And so, it's really about the why first as you introduce that, so that it doesn't appear to be kind of a big brother activity. It appears to be a helping activity, and it is. Of course, anybody could go big brother with data, right? Like micromanagement's a real easy thing to fall into. And if you find yourself in that position, you most likely just have the wrong person in the role to begin with. But I think, sharing data with intention to me is first the education piece, the why. Why does this help the company? Why does this help me? The second bit of that would be consistency, sharing a report once that's really insightful. People will say, oh, that's cool. But managing to it is the most important part of it, and bringing it back to reality and relating it, being able to forecast from it, or say, hey, Q1 over Q2, here's what you did, and here's the differences, and here's what we believe that means. What do you think it means? You have to, the people that you're sharing with have to be a part of that conversation. So I think that's the most important part, is that they're involved. Doesn't mean that they have to build it all. It doesn't have to mean that they agree with it all. But you have to educate and not demand that folks start either to capture that data or to use that data to their advantage.
Makes total sense. And I'm going to switch gears here for a minute out of the very specific and go broad. I'd love to get your perspective as somebody that does now have years under your belt of sales experience. What are some shifts or trends that you're seeing in sales in the profession that you consider positive? And maybe what are some that you see that aren't so positive?
I think the most positive shift that I'm seeing is a commitment to new technology. And, for a long time, in some organizations, I can still feel this. Technology is there to make someone more efficient and more effective. It's not a cool, shiny object that's going to, be like a magic pill for their company. And so I think organizations are finally starting to understand that technology is there to, again, kind of maximize the impact of an individual, that kind of, I don't want to say generation, but that type of person that's like, well, I did it this way and I made it happen, so now you have to do it that way. That's really hard for me to get on board with. It's really hard for new salespeople to get on board with when there is so much available technology and training out there to help them be more successful. So I think that's really like the first thing for me in a trend that I think is a really positive trend. I think, self-education is also a really positive trend. Podcasts like these, books, leadership conferences, people are really, I think, more interested than ever in continuing their own education, getting outside of their company to see the bigger picture of their industry or of their profession. And I know that can really help propel people inside of their career and just make them more passionate about what they do. I think on the negative side of things, I go back to like that magic pill and that kind of quick fix. A lot of technologies, or a lot of even, kind of sales cultures today is like, there's very little ramp. People can be really impatient in bringing on a new salesperson in their organization, even if they have 5 to 7 years of sales experience under their belt. It doesn't mean that they have it all figured out coming in. And it doesn't mean that they were taught best practices. It might mean that they survived 5 to 7 years at another company and were looking for, a greener pasture where someone would be a bit more nurturing. So I think, it's probably that kind of quick turnaround, that quick ramp to success. And I think that's probably the more negative side. And we just encourage people to be a little bit more patient in their onboarding and asking themselves, are we doing everything we can to make them successful, versus, hey, this person's really not cutting it, let's move on.
Feels fairly emblematic of society in general. We all want the quick wins and instant results. But yeah, I totally understand that. I think patience is key. And I want to ask you, one last question before we wrap here. And this one's, fun and challenging at the same time because it's impossible to predict the future. But where do you think the sales profession is going to be in 10 years relative to now? What do you think is going to look dramatically different? What are the big changes coming? Just kind of give me your forecast and your prognosis here.
Oh boy. Well, I don't have a crystal ball, so you're right. That is a really tough question. If I could think about where it's going, I would say that salespeople will start to appear more like consultants than salespeople. I think buyers are more educated, so they expect their salespeople to be more educated. And I'm not talking about product specs. I'm talking about how does this fit into the bigger picture. Yeah. Organizations today, I think, are spreading kind of some of the responsibilities of executive management, and they're kind of letting that trickle down into the organization more than in the past, where a lot of things happen in a closed door setting and only 5 people made decisions. I think that's changing. And so therefore, I think, down to even individual salespeople or SDRs, really any role, is that, if I buy your product, what does that mean for my organization on a operational level, a financial level, a personal level? I think the consulting side of things will continue to pick up, and it's no shock people buy from people that they trust, and some of that trust comes with education and experience, but it really just comes from being honest. And there's people that are out there saying, I don't have all the answers, but I'll help figure it out with you. And those are going to be the most successful salespeople in the future, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we don't need order takers, right? I don't need somebody to help me just place an order. I'm either going to do that in the future automatically, or I'm going to work with somebody that's truly an expert and can help me figure out what I need. So I think we are starting to see a little bit of that, but I agree. I mean, that's a great prediction, because I feel like in 10 years, the expectation of, if I'm actually going to hop on the phone with you or have a meeting with you, is better bring a lot to the table in terms of your expertise. So
yeah, everything happening with supply chain and labor right now. I mean, it's not just the material handling or manufacturing or supply chain industries that are feeling that pain and pressure. Now, every single, market out there is feeling some type of pressure from what's happening in our world economy. Mm-hmm. And so I think you're right, Alex. It's like, we can't just expect the status quo. We can't afford to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so it's not about like what's new and shiny. It's what is the best solution for me today that'll also help me kind of scale into the future. And that takes somebody that's really committed to seeing the bigger picture and has a vision for their customers and prospects.
As an eternal optimist, I'm excited to see where it goes. I think there's lots of room for improvement across the board. So, well, thank you, Lauren, so much for coming on, sharing your wonderful perspective, all of your industry expertise. It means a lot, and just really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. You guys are doing a great job with this podcast. I've really enjoyed listening to several episodes, and wish you the best of luck, and look forward to seeing where it goes.
Thank you so much. Lauren Zach, everyone, Director of Business Development at Storage Solutions. Thank you again, Lauren.
Thanks.